Welcome. This service is provided by freeconferencecall.com.
You are the only participant in the conference. Muted.
Welcome. This service is provided by freeconferencecall.com. Please announce yourself.
Hello.
Muted.
What's that? Yeah, it's already set up. Okay.
Are we good?
So,
Hey, you do the Q&A. Do you want me to like facilitate and keep track of the order? Or do you all want to handle that?
it's up to you. I need some space to put this computer down, and we can move that in my bedroom. I need some space for the computer. We're going to live stream this. Hey, Elmira, I sent out the link for the live stream. Do you want to? Do you want me to ask Sapphire to circulate it?
Did you publish it?
Yeah. I mean, look, but if you wait, you know, I'm never gonna get this right. It's not terrible. It's not on the discovered gift card.
Okay, hang on. It's not dry. I'm like, can you post the sorry, can you post the call-in information on the back end?
Yes.
Hey, I hear kill all
See, Elmira, you think everything should just go on Facebook? Hey, Wilson, can you test the YouTube link just to make sure it's working? For you, from a separate computer?
Listen, things that I love, I got you. CBU, baby.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just say it. I might just I definitely love it. Hey, good morning. Your head's here. Oh. No, I'm not. Oh, that's right. Elmira.
Yeah, I just read.
No, I'm not mad at you. Just reading your name tag incorrectly.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Amy, how are you?
So we'll get started in just a couple minutes. So if you want to grab any more of the awesome pages or human passions, feel free to do so. I made it human passions, but I don't know if that's it. Probably is photo by itself, right?
In Hebrew, it's
What?
Hebrew.
Like by the word itself. Right? What's one of them?
Wasn't Haman? I mean, it just is, we say the ears of Haman, so we say the ear of Haman.
Yeah. It's like scissors.
Okay.
We need to go get the stuff on the screen.
Yes.
Awesome. Sweet. Yeah. So.
Okay. Are you gonna stand on there?
Hey, Jane, how are you? Right?
Suzanne.
My friends are
They're
there.
doing the thing where they're just. Yeah, she said she's been here twice. Chris.
She came 2 times.
You go there for lunch.
Cool.
Hi. So.
Are we gonna get some beers?
Hi, Mark.
So anyway, yeah, interesting story.
Hi.
I'm not gonna.
Good morning.
So I'm getting to know people are kind of shy. Like at a meetup like this, would everybody like talk to each other? They kind of maybe split off into groups a little bit more, which is a little isolating. So I'm trying to figure out how to fix that.
It's so exciting! Mark is here!
I've got some tastes too.
Yeah, there's some empty chairs over there. For
Projects are more complicated than we originally imagined.
Ooh,
But I'm still gonna move forward to try.
that's me.
Science, it turns out, is harder than we thought. As most non-scientists usually think until you get involved, you realize, oh, okay,
Jackie, thank you for always giving me
not
space
nearly
to
as
do.
easy to do. I'll tell you about it.
We all need that space.
What do you say?
We all need that space.
You created silliness. That was you. All right, so I think we're gonna get started. No, I know we're gonna get started. So I'm facilitating. So, okay, everybody, welcome to what we affectionately call the DXC House, at least for the time being. And this is a animal rights community space, and DXC exists for a lot of different reasons, and ultimately it's about creating a movement, an anti-speciesist movement, a movement for animal liberation, and this is where it starts, right? Where we build the community, where we get to know each other, create the friendships and the foundations for the movement that the animals really need. So thank you so much for being here. These are, of course, our weekly meetups. They start at 11 a.m. and there's many awesome parts of it. I will talk about the presentation in a little bit. I wanted to note we've got some awesome sweet things to eat of various varieties. So you have some cookies baked by Wilson and Jenny Lee, is that right? Okay, and we've got Hamantashen, which is a traditional pastry of the Jewish holiday of Purim, which was this past Thursday that Amy baked. No thanks to Sapphire and myself, but she went ahead and baked these. There's dates in the right one, and then chocolate, apricot, and strawberry.
Chocolate, apricot, and strawberry on the left one.
Yeah, and then there's Oreos if you feel like it. And Oreo cookies, yes. So these are all made by community members, and so like it costs us some money to keep this going every week. So if you have the opportunity and you can contribute a little bit, then we have a donation thing. Do you know where it is? Here. So if you can contribute, that would be great.
Is there someone we could PayPal to?
Yes, through the website. Yeah. So yeah. I don't know all the details on that, but somebody can help you out with that.
Yeah.
And okay, so do you want me to talk about the forum later? Later? Okay, cool. Then we're gonna call Michael up to do the news. Yay!
So this is the DXC Weekly News Report. This
Dun,
past
dun,
week,
dun, dun.
DXC member Zach from San Diego did a solo disruption at Bernie Sanders' rally there, videoing the action with a GoPro camera strapped to his chest. Although he couldn't get close to Sanders, he did an emotional speak out at the rally in which he asked Sanders how he could, quote, support the largest contributor to environmental destruction, end quote. Last Saturday, DFC Denver disrupted the annual Colorado State University bull sale. There was a speak out by activist Aiden in which he said that it's, quote, time for this barbaric tradition to end, unquote. That was followed by loud chanting. Two of the activists held up a huge sign that read, "It's not food, it's violence." The Denver activists caused the auctioneer to, quote, abruptly end the sale, according to a DXC Denver Facebook post. There's a video on Facebook that's very moving. More news. Researchers predicted last week that if on a global scale people stop eating meat and animal secretions, it will cut animal agriculture-caused greenhouse gas emissions by 70% and avoid over $1 trillion in costs linked to climate change and healthcare per year. The research done at Oxford University was published in the respected scientific journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and was reported by major media, including ABC News, Reuters, The Washington Post, and Britain's The Independent. The Washington Post reported, quote, results, while theoretical in nature, certainly make a strong case for treating the food system and animal agriculture in particular as a key part of the climate change issue. And still more. Bloomberg reported this week that cage-free eggs could be a financial bonanza for retailers because consumers pay more than twice as much on average for cage-free eggs. Dozens of food corporations have announced they are going cage-free. The public has been led to believe that cage-free is something good. In fact, air quality in so-called cage-free facilities was 8 to 10 times worse than in other systems, according to one recent study. Another study found animal ammonia levels to be toxic in cage-free housing, and researchers found that hen mortality was double in cage-free facilities compared to other systems. The point being that no system that locks up hens is humane. Activist Tyler Lang, who was convicted under the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act for freeing 2,000 mink from a fur farm and spray painting "Liberation is Love" on the side of a barn in Morris, Illinois in August 2013, was sentenced last Tuesday to 3 months of time served, 6 months of home detention, and 6 months of community confinement. His co-defendant, Kevin Olive, was sentenced in February to 3 years in prison for his role in the action. The two also have to pay $200,000 in restitution. A member of Lang's support team, Amanda Shemex, told Truth Out, quote, although critical of their actions during Johnson's sentencing, Assistant U.S. Attorney Bethany K. Lysenthal described Johnson's intentions as, quote, noble, unquote. And on Tuesday, she described Tyler's beliefs as, quote, a very noble cause, unquote. The headline for the Truth Out article is, quote, animal rights, a very noble cause or terrorism? The state can't decide.
Thank you.
I thank you, Michael, for that news. And yeah, those videos, Zach's video of the Bernie Sanders speak out was really cool, and the Denver video is amazing because of the proximity to actual animals who are being treated as commodities who are about to be sold off to be killed. It's really dramatic. I also wanted to mention the name tags, which is something that we're doing today, something new. It's totally optional, but if you'd like to, feel free to grab a name tag. I had this specially, so sorry. Not everybody gets those, but mine says, ask me about DXC Connections because it's the best thing in the world, and I'll tell you about it. So that's all for the intro, and now we'll get to the presentation. This month we're actually doing a teach-in, and the subject is what to make of animal welfare, and you've got some pretty phenomenal presenters, Amira, Priya, and Wayne, who know a whole lot about this. And different cities around the world are going to be doing their own teach-ins, and a lot of people are going to be tuning in to watch ours. So I'll call up the presenters and let them take it away.
Do we all want to sit up together? At some point we will. I'll probably pull 3 chairs.
Okay, Wayne first.
But I guess I can start here for now. Thanks to everyone for coming out today. I'm Wayne. I'm one of the residents of the house and an organizer for Direct Action Everywhere. I've also been doing investigatory work and rescue work in various forms of animal abusing facilities for about 10 years. And my views on animal welfare have changed dramatically over the years, and they still change based on new facts and information. But the talk I'm going to give you today is, DXC over the past 2-3 years has accumulated a massive amount of knowledge and expertise, not only about specific types of production, specific regulations that have been promulgated in California and around the world, but about the concept of animal welfare, the history of animal welfare, the philosophy and the strategy behind animal welfare, And we thought we should have a network-wide conversation discussing some of the key takeaways from our research and investigations over the past 2 years. Not necessarily to give you concrete and firm conclusions about what to think about all the animal welfare reforms, but to just start some conversations and present some facts and information. So DXE obviously has a particular strategic position within the movement. We are self-described radicals. We're not afraid to apologize for the fact that we believe that every animal should be protected from any sort of captivity, violence, and suffering. But at the same time, we understand there are a lot of different perspectives and approaches in this movement. And in fact, many of us, including me, have participated and continue to participate in welfare reforms of various sorts. I think this conversation is especially important right now because not only are massive numbers of corporations adopting various welfare reforms, we're also seeing some backlash and some regression in places like the United Kingdom, where this week the United Kingdom decided to take away all poultry welfare standards from the government and from regulators and place it in the hands of the industry. So the welfare regime that originally was promised to be an effective precaution and a effective way to improve the lives of hens is now being handed back over to the industry, which is obviously a concerning development for all of us who care about the lives of animals. Okay, so I am going to jump into the presentation by starting with some just basic historical background. And I'm lucky enough that when I was a faculty member at Northwestern School of Law, one of my colleagues, Claire Priest, who's no longer at Northwestern, she's at Yale, is really kind of one of the world's best experts on development of various forms of cruelty law in the 19th century. She's primarily known as a feminist historian, but she's done a lot of really interesting work in animal welfare that I got to spend a year talking to her about. And I'm going to be talking to you about some of Claire's findings from looking through thousands and thousands of pages of historical documents, statutes, oppositions from counties, states, and frankly the entire nation from the early 19th century to today. And I think the big upshot from Claire's research is that animal welfare, contrary to what many people think, is not something that's new. And in fact, the history of animal welfare predates the history of effective preventions and protections for domestic violence and child cruelty. So let's go back about 200, 150 years ago. And in the early 19th century, the early 1800s, there was actually no law against wife beating. There was no law against beating your children, and obviously there are no animal cruelty laws. And the thinking was that men, who were the only people who were allowed to vote, and who were the only allowed people in many states who were allowed to own property, basically had dominion over all the other beings on this planet, including women, children, and animals. Starting in the mid-19th century, however, a number of states began to start passing, surprisingly, not laws against domestic violence or laws against child cruelty, but laws against animal cruelty. And interestingly, the original laws against animal cruelty were framed not so much as protections of the animals themselves, but as, quote, public nuisance statutes. So does anyone know what a public nuisance is? Lawyers don't count. So you can probably guess what public case.
It's something that disturbs the public that
Yes.
that you want to get rid of.
Exactly. So things like environmental pollution, noise, these statutes have existed in common law, these principles have existed in common law in the English tradition for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And the idea is if somebody's making a big fuss and it disturbs everyone in the public, it's got to be stopped. And the early animal cruelty law statutes passed in the United States and in the United Kingdom were framed as public nuisance statutes because when people were beating horses on the streets, and this is back in the day when the horse-drawn carriage was the primary mode of transit, it made everyone want to avert their eyes. No one wanted to look at it. So, and the horses would cry, they'd scream, the children would cry and scream, the fathers and mothers would be upset. And so the idea was not so much we need to protect the animals, but if it's going to happen, don't do it in public. We don't want to see that in public. And so by 1879, interestingly, 32 states had passed animal cruelty laws to protect animals like horses from violence. So if you beat an animal in public, a dog, a cat, a pig, a horse, any animal, it would often be a felony. And this is by 1879, around 150 years ago. In that same year, who wants to guess how many states had laws against domestic violence?
0.
Close.
1, 2.
2. So 32 states had animal cruelty laws. Only 2 had laws protecting women from being beaten by their husbands. So in that same time period, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, which to this day is one of the most prominent animal welfare organizations in the world, had already formed chapters in a dozen or so states. And it has now thrived and become one of the largest nonprofit organizations in the world. In fact, the SPCA and HSUS are massive by nonprofit standards. The largest LGBT organization in the world, the LA Leadership, or LA LGBT Center in Los Angeles, has a budget of $100 million, which is about a third of the budget, or 2/3 of the budget of HSUS. So as big as important as we think gay rights is, the largest LGBT organization in the United States is significantly smaller, $50 million smaller in terms of dollar terms than HSUS. So what the upshot is that animal welfare is nothing new, animal welfare is big, and animal welfare is growing. So this is just an image of kind of the sorts of scenes that people in the 19th century did not want to have to face themselves with. So one interesting phenomenon that many of you who are lawyers may have heard about is that not only did animal welfare predate laws against cruelty against women and children, but early prosecutions for domestic violence and child cruelty were often framed in terms of the animal welfare statute. There were early prosecutions of child cruelty that were using the animal cruelty statutes to pursue the prosecution. And the idea behind kind of the parallel between prosecuting animal crimes and child crimes and domestic violence is, in all these cases, the victims were seen as completely innocent and perfect victims, right? While they were obviously incapable of making their own decisions, so the men had to control their lives, when there was violence imparted on them, they were the most innocent and perfect victims. It's just an animal. It's just a child. It's just a woman. So fast forward half a century, and I will say this slide is making a stronger claim than I am necessarily comfortable with, but I'm probably the most welfarist person within the DXC steering committee, so I'm obviously going to be sympathetic to a little bit of criticism of this particular slide. I do think it's roughly accurate, though. If you look at the history of animal welfare protections for the past 150, 200 years, animal welfare has not worked well. And even when it has worked, it's worked far less effectively than we hoped. And the basic problem with all these animal welfare statutes is, from the very beginning, they weren't framed as protections for the animals. They're protections of the people who didn't want to see the animal cruelty, who didn't want to smell it, who didn't want to hear it. And to this day, one of my former mentors, Cass Sunstein, has written about a fundamental problem in pretty much all animal welfare protections, which is that animals do not have what is called legal standing. So you or I, and now, thankfully today, women and children too, if we're injured, we can independently bring a claim, bring a lawsuit, and go to prosecutors and police and say, I have been harmed. Please protect me in some way. Or I will continue to be harmed. Please give me injunctive relief or court protections that ensure that the person who's harming me will not continue to violate my rights. Animals do not have this basic legal right because they're considered legal things. And what the legal terminology for this is that they do not have legal standing. So when an animal is injured, instead of the animal or a representative of the animal being able to go to a court of law or law enforcement and say, hey, I've been injured, try to protect me, what you have to do is find someone who owns the animal, the person who has an interest in the animal, and only their interest can be protected in a legal court of law because that person, and not the animal himself or herself, are the ones who are considered to have legal standing. So naturally, in the current system, where virtually all the 10 billion animals being tortured and killed are being tortured and killed by their owners, there's never going to be any incentive to bring a case because the only person who would have a right to bring a case for an injury to the animal is the one who owns the animal. But it's always the owner who's perpetuating the abuse. So this has been a problem from the very beginnings of animal welfare, but the second period beyond the mid-19th century where there was a massive kind of effort to implement animal welfare reforms, interestingly, was not the present time, but the mid-20th century. In 1954, Dwight D. Eisenhower signed a bill called the Humane Slaughter Act, which was federal legislation that covered all mammals, and to date does not cover birds, but it's arguable whether it should cover birds, all mammals across the entire country. So this is the most massive animal welfare reform that has ever been implemented, and that has ever even been proposed since, because it covered millions and millions of animals in corporations across the country. And it happened because many muckrakers are going into newly industrialized agricultural facilities, exposing the horrendous conditions within, and there was a concern by the public. In fact, the concern was so great that in 1958, at the height of the Cold War, where we were facing potential nuclear holocausts around the country because of the conflict with the Soviet Union, the Korean War, the upcoming Vietnam War, Dwight D. Eisenhower, who himself was a military man, is reported to have said to the press, if you went by mail alone, you'd think the entire country was only concerned about humane slaughter. This is 1958, 50 years before today. So again, this shows that animal welfare is not something new, but it's also something that has actually led to significant mobilizations and groundbreaking federal legislation in the past. So the Humane Slaughter Act in 1958 was more ambitious, more aggressive, more costly for industry than any other welfare reform that had been proposed, and than any welfare reform that has been implemented since. What it did was it required that every animal that's going through a slaughter line would need to be unconscious and insensate before it was torn to pieces. And what is the result then? Well, the result has been, first and foremost, dramatic lack of enforcement. The Washington Post, about 5, maybe 10 years ago, did an investigation of the Humane Slaughter Act, found that in many cases, the auditors who were supposed to enforce the Humane Slaughter Act were locked out of the buildings they were supposed to audit. So they literally were just standing outside knocking on the door. And because the Department of Agriculture is beholden to the agricultural industry and would not fight for its auditors, the auditors didn't even have access to the facilities that they were supposed to be investigating. The second traumatic finding was they found that I believe it was 20%, I don't remember the exact figure, but it was something like 1/5 of the slaughterhouses were having widespread violations of the Humane Slaughter Act. A violation being considered as 5% or more of the animals were still conscious and squealing in pain while they're being teared to pieces on the slaughter line. The upshot is that hundreds of millions of animals continue to be conscious and sensate while their bodies are being ripped to pieces on assembly lines. And this is all happening despite the fact that we have federal legislation that in theory protects all these animals from exactly that horrendous experience. So back in 1958, as with today, there were a lot of vegetarian campaigners. And back in 1958, many people thought that even if the Humane Slaughter Act didn't have proper enforcement, even if it didn't actually benefit the lives of animals in the short term, it might be a good thing because it starts generating public dialogue. And as public dialogue spreads and it becomes more engaged, perhaps per capita meat consumption will decline. People will see that there's something problematic about slaughterhouses. If we need this federal legislation protecting animals in every slaughterhouse around the country, maybe there's something problematic fundamentally about the system. And the hope was among many vegetarian advocates, and there were some Adventists, there were environmentalists, there were animal cruelty advocates, or I should say animal cruelty opponents, back in the mid-20th century and the 19th century, who hoped the system would gradually disappear. The idea was, hopefully this will start things moving down the right path. And I think this chart kind of more or less reflects whether that hope was fulfilled. So this is red meat consumption only. And I only use red meat consumption, but if you look at poultry consumption and fish, you're basically going to see the same sorts of trends. But I use red meat because the Humane Slaughter Act, which again was the most groundbreaking animal welfare legislation ever passed in history, only covers primarily pigs and cows. And also covers other mammals, but from the purpose of animal agriculture, the animals are mainly covers of the animals we consider quote-unquote red meat. And you can see, starting in the 1950s, if anything, there was a dramatic spike in the number of animals being eaten on a per capita basis, which means per person. So this graph is not due to population growth. This is each individual is eating more and more red meat over time. And there has been a dip in the 2000s, but over most of the period of the Humane Slaughter Act's history, rather than slowing down or stopping or reversing the trend of increased per capita consumption of red meat, it has been consistent with massive increase. Okay. Fast forward another half century to 2008, literally 50 years after the Humane Slaughter Act was passed, we have another animal welfare reform that is described by many folks, including somebody I consider a hero and a friend, Peter Singer, as the most groundbreaking animal welfare legislation in history. It's called Proposition 2. Proposition 2, like the Humane Slaughter Act, covered a huge number of animals, although not quite as many as the Humane Slaughter Act. It covered 20 million hens in the state of California and required that hens, in addition to mother pigs and veal calves, would have enough space to at least stand up, turn around, spread their limbs. The reason I say it covers mainly hens is because gestation crates for pigs and veal calves don't actually exist to a significant degree in California. There are only a few thousand of each. So mainly you can think of Proposition 2 as a statute that was covering and protecting egg-laying hens in the state. And obviously DXC over the past 2 years, with 2 major investigations and a massive amount of FOIA requests and research by people like Michael and Leslie, have accumulated a massive amount of information and wisdom about what Proposition 2 actually meant for hens. And I'm going to pass things off to my co-organizer, Priya, now, who did a lot of the legal research and made a lot of the phone calls documenting what was actually happening in Proposition 2 after it was passed in 2008 and went into effect in 2016.
Thanks, Wayne. So when we were working on finding out more about what was actually done with Prop 2, I was doing legal research with the help of Max, who's not here today. But basically what that means is we made like hundreds of calls to every county trying to find out, okay, so there's this Proposition 2, like what has been done? And I had the funniest conversations with people. So, I would call counties and just ask them like, hi, I just wanted to find out if San Francisco County has done any investigations or or has made any arrests in regards to enforcing Proposition 2. And they were like, what is this? First of all, they did not know what Prop 2 is. And then I would tell them like, it's about animals. And they're like, oh, what? You want cages for animals? I think you need to go to Petco was the funniest thing I heard. Someone who was like, oh, I'll give you the number to the pound. Oh, I think, and it was like this, I got told to call every department and nobody knew what was going on. And then finally, the way we found out was we basically, you kind of have to just ask animal control officers, and they, looked into their system, and what we found was that there's basically zero enforcement of Prop 2, and so that was pretty shocking that people, like so millions of people have celebrated this, yet when it actually comes down to it, there's no structure or system for enforcing Prop 2, and really nothing has been done. So this is something that we, really celebrated. And, speaking of animal welfare, like what was the result? And so it's definitely like a feel-good thing, but at the end of the day, there's no enforcement. So as many of you might have seen, we went inside of a facility, JS West, which is a supplier to Trader Joe's, Costco, and Safeway. And we found just horrible conditions. And this is a company which is supposedly humane, and we found everything from dead and rotting hens on the floors of cages. We found chickens with just unseen grotesque growth and abscesses on their heads and elsewhere. We found birds who were starving because they could not eat due to a standard practice, which is called beak trimming, and hens who were basically naked because loss of feathers, and injuries everywhere on their legs and their bodies, and just so much crowding where the hens were just piling on top of each other because they had nowhere else to go. And also found hundreds of documents of death records where, sorry, I should stop talking, of birds dying. So this is what we found. We also rescued a little hen named Emma, who when we found her, she could not walk. She was so weak, and when we took her out of that horrible place, she recovered really fast. So as someone who's been inside of a lot of facilities, yeah, this was definitely, every facility is horrible, but it's especially, it's just so, it makes you so angry when you're walking inside of a place which has a stamp called Certified Humane, and you walk inside and you see things that you would not expect, even as people who know that there's something horrible happening everywhere. That's all I have. Omira?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what DXE should do about all of this stuff. Sorry, I don't know if you wanted to go through these photos. These are just some of the photos from the JS West investigation, which was supposed, quote unquote, a Prop 2 farm.
Can I actually just say something about that photo? So that is a wing. And one of the most common forms of death in cage-free facilities is called being, quote unquote, caught in the system. And the reason this happens is that, and this was taken from a cage-free facility. The reason this happens is in these multi-layered air systems, the birds are everywhere, first of all. And there are these big machines and gears that are constantly moving these layers up and down. They're feeding food in and out. They're raising and lowering platforms. And when you have 10,000 birds in a barn, when they're constantly being shoved everywhere, you're going to pretty commonly have a bird who just gets her wing, her leg, her head caught in the facility. So literally, if you look at kind of research reports from cage-free facilities, one of the common forms of death, in addition to cannibalism, is called being caught in the system. And this was the result of it. Sorry, I just wanted to explain
Yeah, no,
what that
it's a
was.
very powerful photo.
Just
and it-
quickly before we transition to you speaking, there's some folks on the floor, maybe folks on the back of the room, if we can make a little more room on the couch in the back, so folks who are on the ground can actually find a place to sit. Some are definitely squeeze a little bit. Just
Okay, Adam, you're good?
I'm good.
Okay, so I'm gonna talk briefly about what DXE should, how we should think about animal welfare, what we should do about animal welfare. Obviously, I'm not an authority on what DXE should do, and we value a diversity of perspectives at DXE, so I'm gonna just throw out some ideas, some thoughts that I have had, that other people have had, and hopefully we can end this with a discussion with all the people in the room, and then there's also people who are joining us virtually. So if you don't agree with me, that's okay, because I'm like not like the DXC boss yet. So I want to talk a little bit. Sorry, I made this in like 30 seconds. I don't know if you can see it. I want to talk a little bit about what DXC has done in the past. So when DXC was started, it was very much like an animal rights and animal liberation organization, not a quote-unquote animal welfare organization. And I don't know if it's very useful to have those dichotomies, but if you look at the things that we have written, the things that we have done, and our organizing principles, it's pretty clear, we believe strongly in animal liberation. So for those of you who haven't seen these or want a little refresher, just really briefly, a few of them, animal liberation, we believe that all animals have the right to be safe, happy, and free. And none of these organizing principles or how we operate are necessarily like better or like more important or less important. They are all harmonious, but on our website we clearly state right here, like notably species equality. Like this is like one of the hallmarks of what we do at DXE, and is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, is animal liberation and anti-speciesism. Other things that we think or that are very important is changing systems. We don't want to work to just change individuals' behavior or work within the system to make small reforms. Our goal is to completely overthrow the system of animal agriculture and create a new and better system where animals are treated as, as persons, as legal persons. Truth. We want to say the hard, uncomfortable truths, even though it's difficult for us to say and sometimes difficult for people to hear. We want to speak truthfully, and I think this is especially relevant with one of the other organizing principles, which is the animal's perspective. I think we try to think about how would the animals want us to fight if they were in our position. If we were in their position, what would we want people to do for us in this movement? And we dream big. We want to achieve these massive system overhauls within one generation, within 40 years, not 1,000 years down the road. And we truly believe that. And also relevant, I think, is integrity, which is one of the ways that we operate, which is choosing the ethical route over the easy one. So, I mean, if these organizing principles were terrible, we could just scrap them and make new ones because they're not like law. We just, Wayne and Chris and whoever just wrote them. But I don't think they are terrible, and for me, they definitely, motivated me and is what drew me to DXE versus another animal rights organization. And I think this is similar for lots of other people in this room. When we see these principles, we are like so empowered and so motivated and confident in ourselves that we can change the world for animals. So I do think these are important, and we should look at them when we decide what actions we do and do not take as a network. So what do I think those organizing principles tell us? In some, they tell us that we need to do whatever is best for the animals and for the movement. Hopefully, a lot of those times, these things work together. Obviously, our end goal is to do the best we can for animals, but we also need a strong movement to get there. So we need to think about what our actions are doing for the movement and for the animals. In terms of animals, we need to do our research, or like Wayne needs to do the research, and we need to read the research that he does, because like even for myself, as someone who doesn't believe that cage-free is great, I kind of thought at least it would be somewhat better. We have like, at least they're not in cages. But if you do the research and you really read the research, it's not better, and it might actually be worse. So when we see an animal welfare reform that's proposed, we do need to actually look into what does this actually mean for animals. I don't think it's useful to put blanket statements out there that GXC will never do anything related to animal welfare. We should never support an animal welfare reform, because maybe there is one that comes out and we do the research and it's like something that's fairly easy to pass and it actually is going to really impact the lives of animals. Maybe then that's something we want to support. But like we saw for the cage-free, Wade did the research and it was not it's not something that is helpful to animals and probably not something we want to support, or work towards as a network. So that's for the animals, but for the movement, what we do know for movement building is that we need incremental victories. People are, the recidivism rate within animal rights is so high. That means that people leave this movement really quickly. People burn out or they don't find community or whatever, life happens and people leave the movement. So we need incremental victories to get people to join our movement and to get people to stick around. So I think our task, and what I'd love to talk about, is what are those incremental victories? I know personally incremental victories of welfare reforms, especially welfare reforms that are meaningless or harmful to animals, are not motivating, are not the type of incremental victories that would motivate me to stay in this movement. So as a network, what are some timely, realistic goals that would motivate activists and would actually help animals and stand up to our principles? And we have been having these discussions as a network lately, and I think these are really good discussions, and hopefully we can talk more about that. And we might have to think outside the box of what are typical victories within the animal rights movement. I think a lot of times we see a victory as this animal abuser went to jail, or this, we got 1,000 signatures on a petition. Those are the ones that are pretty typical. If we can think broader and think about what sorts of victories we want as a network that we can achieve within 6 months, 2 years, on the road to our end goal of animal liberation. So I do think, though, that as Wayne was saying, animal welfare is nothing new. It's not something that we can just ignore. Like it's here, and we shouldn't just ignore it. It is an important thing that we should spend time thinking about. And I think we can use all of this welfare stuff as an opportunity at DXC. Every time somebody talks about animal welfare, I take that to mean that they obviously care about animals. If you, nobody cares about rock welfare, right? Because rocks do not have less good or more good lives. At least I don't think anyone cares about rock welfare. But if people are saying that they care if animals have these welfare reforms, it means that they understand that these animals can have less good or more good lives. And we can use that as an opportunity to insert our message into that dialogue. As if you care that animals can move their wings, then you should probably care that they can be with their children, or that they can live out their natural lives. And this is why I think that we have targeted the humane myth so much at DXC is really great, because we've been able to insert our message into this dialogue that is happening with people who I do think truly do care about animals. And what I will argue as kind of DXC's overall role in all of this is to be the radicals that pushes everybody in this movement to be better. So right now it seems that the general public has this idea that there's two options. You can buy eggs from hens in cages, or you can buy eggs from hens in not cages, or cage-free, or whatever you want to call it. And if you care about animals, you buy the ones that are not in cages. But we need to be the people who create this alternative that is so outside of the system, and say to people hey, if you care about animals, the option is not don't buy eggs from cage-free hens. The option is don't buy eggs at all and just look out for animals. And I don't know if we want to say left or anything we want to push everyone to the left, or we want to push everyone somewhere. But if we keep kind of taking this, I got musical.
Music, I'm not sure why.
If we can keep pushing everybody towards this end of animal welfare, I think we will see all of the other welfare organizations kind of moving along the path. And we have seen that. Groups like MFA, all of these other groups are talking more and more about humane myth. Recently, MFA had this Facebook post about, so-and-so is going cage-free. Most of the comments were people this is not good enough. So I think as a network, even though we've only been around for 2 to 3 years, we've done a good job of pushing everybody in the right direction towards animal liberation. And I don't think that this means that we need to argue with these people. We should work with other groups when we find common ground and join them in their efforts if we can collaborate on a certain project. But I see DXC's role as kind of this radical group that is pushing everyone to be better, pushing everyone to do better for animals. And maybe that doesn't always make us the most popular people, but I think we can do it in a way that is like respectful to all the other groups working out there. And that is what I wanted to say. So I don't know if you want to wrap it up or if you want to have discussion about that. It's 11.
No, we have discussion.
Okay,
Just
so
let people, I don't know, do we want to have questions of the material presented first, or should we just open things up to discussion?
Well, it's up to the panelists.
Okay, why don't we do some questions?
sure.
Yeah, do you
Clarifying
want,
questions or questions about any of the factual
Sapphire,
information that's presented?
do you want to
Why don't you-
rearrange
why-
in the
well,
circle?
I mean, usually what we do is we just open things up to discussion. For that, we do a circle. If people want to do a more standard Q&A first, maybe we can keep it this way so people can all have their eyes on there. Why don't you just facilitate this so we can keep it a little stack for a while?
Cool, yeah, okay, so we'll do a little Q&A with Priya, Wayne, and Almira. They all have name tags, and by the way, for those who came in a little later, if you want a name tag, go ahead and grab one. It's totally optional, but they're also cool.
And maybe people who are not physically in the room, if you have a question, you can message Chris.
Okay,
Or
great,
we'll-
so, okay, so just, yeah, you all let me know, like, so if you have any questions, just raise your hand, and, you know, once you make eye contact, I'll acknowledge you, I'll add you to my mental stack, and I'll just keep the order. So, Suzanne.
Could you update some of the reasons why cage-free might be worse? I want to include this message in my conversations with people.
I guess it's probably a question for me. I've probably read 200 plus scientific papers on hen housing over the past 10 years. Actually, it's over 10 years. It's probably maybe more than that at this point. But even in the past couple of weeks, because I created a little memorandum, I had a couple of close friends who are big funders of animal rights campaigns who are very enthusiastic and endorsing cage-free. And when I talked to them, I just realized that they actually didn't know anything at all, seemingly, about hen housing and how hen housing systems actually operate, what kind of cage-free facilities look like, the standard production facilities that construct them, because pretty much all the cage-free facilities that have been constructed nowadays are being made by one company. So cage-free, in theory, could mean anything, right? You could have a sanctuary as a cage-free facility in a sense, but we have to understand what cage-free actually means concretely for the hens. When a corporation says they're going cage-free, what does that mean? Not theoretically, not in the best case scenario, but in the real world, when the hens are actually being confined and they're being raised for agriculture. And I think, to me, there are three big things that you can draw from literature showing the massive problems of cage-free. My view is that cage-free is worse, but there are certainly folks who disagree with this. I think most of these folks tend not to care as much about suffering and pain and tend to care more about just opportunities to engage in some behavior. Because the one benefit of cage-free is that the hens do have the opportunity to move around a little bit. So instead of living in a cage that's either the size of a flatbed truck or the size of a piece of paper, depending on the type of cage facility, they'll have a barn that is the size of a few football fields. The problem is, in terms of stocking density, which just basically means how many animals are crammed in the same amount of space, they're not really decreasing the stocking density at all. It's still, maybe 100 to 150 square inches per bird, and 100 to 150 square inches per bird is about the size of a legal size piece of paper. So this is, 11 by 14. Right? So this is about the amount of size that any of these cage-free birds will get for their entire life. Right? So it's cage-free. It doesn't mean the birds have freedom to move. They do get to perch. They get to dust bathe a little bit, but I think the big problem for me is when you look at the data and the science, they're engaging in these natural behaviors, but it's not leading to decreased stress levels. And there are a lot of ways you can measure stress levels, but the three best ways are probably kind of whether the birds are defeathered, just their general physical condition, and there are certain scientific protocols that have been established to determine how much stress just physically this bird has had to endure. And in cage-free facilities, oftentimes you're finding birds that are far more defeathered in the most strategically vulnerable places, like their heads and their necks, from being pecked just from the filth. And, the second is there's a hormone called cortisone. I actually don't know how to pronounce it because I've never heard it spoken. I just read it in a lot of papers. Cortisol. Okay. So it's
the same as in humans.
Yeah, it's in. I know it's in mammals as well. But cortisol is a hormone that is commonly used as a measure of stress. The problem with it is it's also triggered by just excitement, like adrenaline in human beings. Like you're often will get cortisone, and so a lot of scientists are not sure, but cortisol levels seem to be elevated in cage-free facilities. And the third is your adrenal glands. So all of us have these glands called adrenal glands. When you're stressed out, they release cortisone in your blood. The fight or flight kind of syndromes kicks in, and your system kicks in, and you're ready to fight or run. And over time, if you constantly live in a very stressed out environment, so people who face domestic violence or abuse, for example, will have unusually large adrenal glands. So it's a measure of like long-term permanent stress. And what you're seeing is with adrenal glands is that they're basically the same size. So on that, all of the physiological measures of stress show either worse stress or equivalent stress in modern cage-free facilities and cage facilities. I'm going to try and move quickly on the other two because the first one was a little too long. I want to give people time to ask questions. But the other two reasons cage-free facilities seem to have some problems are, one, air quality. So one of the reasons they originally placed hens in cages was if you're going to stuff 10,000 birds in a very tightly confined environment, it's going to become filthy incredibly quickly. So anyone who's had even like, 2 dogs or 3 dogs will probably be able to tell you. I mean, I've got 3 animals in this house, and the amount of hair, feces, urine, especially if you're not taking them out ever, quickly accumulates unless you have some way of segregating the filth from the animals. Cage-free facilities, that doesn't happen. You have 5, 10, 15, sometimes more, 20,000 birds in a single shed. They're kicking up feces and ammonia everywhere, and the ammonia really has nowhere to go. And the best study, which was done just a year and a half ago, of cage-free facilities found ammonia levels were so high that they even violated the egg industry's own animal welfare standards. And I think a lot of us who were in Petaluma egg farms probably have had the experience of, JS West, as bad as it was, as cool as it was actually relatively clean by egg farm standards. Petaluma, which was a cage-free facility, was nightmarishly dirty. It was filthy. It was so sick. There was so much feces that at times, I think Priya lost a shoe just in the filth, like just from walking around because there's feces everywhere. And the birds have to live in that constantly. And that not only causes immediate stress because it's hard to open your eyes, it's hard to breathe, but it also causes respiratory disease. And as you imagine, being a hen in an egg farm that has a respiratory disease is not a good life. No one's going to give you soup. No one's going to give you antibiotics. You're going to die a slow, miserable, painful death. So that's the second reason, air quality. And the third reason is mortality. It turns out, as you might expect, if you stuff 10,000 animals, or maybe 3 to 5 pounds, and each of them gets about this amount of space for their entire lives for 2 years, fights break out. And the most prominent form of death, and the most, frankly, terrifying and sickening form of death that happens in cage-free facilities is cannibalism. The most common way this happens is hens that are constantly laying eggs have what's called vent prolapse. Their sexual organs will literally be inverted, so like the inside goes outside. And once that's open, the hens who are constantly struggling, fighting for space, trying to get food every moment of their life, when they want to get from one side of the barn to the other, they fight through 100 different animals just to get food and water. If you've got, if I'm going insane from confinement and people are constantly shoving me around and I see like, oh, there's something that looks kind of appetizing, you just start eating the other bird. And so, cannibalism is not that common in cage facilities. It happens, but it's not that common. In cage-free facilities, it's one of the most common forms of death, along with being caught in the system, respiratory disease, hypocalcemia, which is just leaching calcium because they're laying some of the eggs. But cannibalism is the big prominent cause of death. And the best study of cage-free facilities showed mortality rates largely from cannibalism that were 2 to 3 times higher, about 2.5 times higher in cage-free facilities than in cage facilities. Now, all these things, in theory, could be fixed, right? Cage-free, in theory, could be great. I mean, if we're giving each animal the 20 square feet, like my view is for genuine welfare improvements, and I've done a lot of chicken rescue, I've done a lot of research, I've been on lots of sanctuaries, I've been on lots of farms. I think if you actually want to improve the welfare of hens considerably, you need to move from 100, 150 square inches, if that's something like 20 square feet. So this is like, 100 times more room than they're currently being given. It would also increase the costs by maybe like 10, 20, 30x for eggs. That's not going to happen anytime in the near future. And the few pasture-raised facilities that we're seeing that are currently selling eggs, the prices are 10 times as much. But no one wants to see that, and it's not realistic to pass a law in the present time that would cause that sort of shift. And so what people do is cage-free. The problem is if cage-free isn't properly implemented and isn't actually leading to the welfare improvements that are being promised to customers, what it ends up doing is driving growth in the industry, more profits because they do get a price premium, and possibly causing more suffering for animals. But I've blogged about this. There's a blog on the DXC blog called Why Cage-Free is Harming Hens. There's also a memorandum that has all the research sites that I looked at when I did my research, and I'm happy to pass it along to you or anyone else who's interested. I will also say that, just for diversity of perspectives, I know there are folks at HSUS who I actually think are amazing activists who have a good faith intent to help animals who do disagree with me on this. My view is they haven't looked at the research as carefully as I have, but I'm sure they have various reasons for thinking the research they're looking at is more significant than the research I'm looking at. So I think it's worthwhile to look at this stuff that, for example, HSUS has done on this issue too, before you decide for yourself how you feel.
Just a quick follow-up on that question. I'm not going to be too long, but I know we didn't introduce or properly introduce DXC's Open Rescue Network. So when you hear us saying like we went inside of these facilities, we're investigators as a part of DXC's Open Rescue Network, which we believe that if we really believe that these animals should be free, that they're not things, then we walk inside of those facilities with no mask on and we take these animals out. So we have been to cage-free facilities. I think all three of us up here have. And like as someone who's gone inside of multiple cage-free facilities, I can tell you I cannot go back in. There was a time where I had to come out because it was so hard to breathe for the next 3 days. Like I could just feel shit inside of my lungs. And just to imagine that these birds have to live their entire lives like this, it is horrifying, especially when you've been inside. You like smell the air, and we picked up birds from like pile of feces that was so deep it was hard to take them out. And as Wayne said, I lost my shoe, and that's the kind of environment that cage-free is. Just a little snapshot. I mean, you can't really understand it until you go inside. But and it's also like these birds, they're not exactly like friendly with each other. Just like if there was 7,000 people in this room, we would all want to kill each other. They're terrified, and especially the little ones.
Yeah.
They're like running away because they have nowhere else to go, and they're going to be trampled to death. That is how they're going to die.
Yeah, whenever I like reflect on this and I think about this, or even when I think about the things that I've seen, I'm always reminded of. Has anyone read Elie Wiesel's book, The Night?
Yes.
So there's this terrible scene in The Night. It's about the Holocaust, and he was a victim of the Holocaust. He was sent to a concentration camp where, they're confined in a concentration camp. Concentration camps, for the record, did not confine people the way factory farms did. I mean, they're confined, but not so tightly they can't move. It was more like, probably we'd be living in arrangements like this for our entire lives in a concentration camp. But it's still like, imagine living in a room like this with all these people and never being able to get out for your entire life. Pretty miserable. But there's a story, it's a true story, that Elie recounts in The Night, where food was not regularly provided. When food came, it was always a huge fight, and this happens in farms too. They fight over food and water, they fight over everything. There was some bread that was left out, and Elie Wiesel, like, just like everyone was just desperately screaming, like elbowing at everyone, clawing, and he realized he's beaten and like clawed and seriously injured someone right next to him, and he grabs the food and starts eating it, and he looks down and realizes it's his own father. And like that is kind of the reality for all these hens. Like, because hens naturally, if you see hens in a sanctuary, they're extraordinarily social animals. They bond with each other, they form these friendships. And like, there's never a moment in their life where they have that sort of peace, that sort of flourishing, that sort of meaning in their lives. And the moment they have that sort of experience, it's destroyed by the horrendous conditions. Because even if you have a friend, in a desperate struggle for survival, everything's fair game, and everyone's going to die. You need to get that bread, and you're so desperate to get that water. Or if someone's sick and standing underneath you, and you just have to trample over them to get the food, you're going to do it. And that's what happens to all the hens. It's just.
Yeah, so we can post Wayne's blog post on the event page, by the way. And it was Leslie and then Rasa, and maybe if there's like one other clarification question, but we wanted to move on to the discussion. So,
And you can still ask questions about what they're talking about, or just move into
the more informal kind of community part. So Leslie and then
Yeah, I wanted to ask Wayne if you could talk a little bit about what it's like on pasture-raised facilities, what they're like.
So yeah, pasture raised is a term that doesn't really have any significance at this point, and like all these terms, there's no one really enforcing them. But I have been on pasture-raised egg farms, and I've rescued hens from them. They are better. There's no question about that. The feathering is much less. The hens are normal. They're not, like, cage-free and cage hens, they're kind of, for lack of a better word, they're sort of psychotic. And I don't mean that in, like, pejorative. Like, I'm not trying to attack them personally. I'm just saying, like, literally, if you had a hen psychologist, they diagnose this animal as psychotic when they're removed from the facility. Like, just the way they move. Like, the weirdest thing is in both cage-free and cage facilities is, like, they all want to, like, find some place that's confined because they don't understand space. So, like, they have induced agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is a syndrome in human beings where, like, wide open spaces terrify you and you just don't know what to think of them. And so, like, I remember, I think it was actually Emma. No, it wasn't Emma because Emma could walk. I forget who it was. We rescued one hen and, like, she kept, like, slamming herself into books and bookshelves. Like, she'd cram herself in, like, little spaces. And I don't remember which hen this was, but, like, it was causing her pain to, like, and it might have been Steffi. Yeah, Steffi was another one of the hens we rescued from Petaluma. But she just, like, kept smashing herself into them. It's like, oh my God, like, just, you're free. Like, experience the joy of freedom, but they don't understand it. Pasture-raised hens don't go through that. They're not psychotic, which is great. But they still have a huge number of issues, and they're still confined. And, like, the example I always give about how even pasture-raised facilities are horrible, violent, and cruel is, you know, there was a hen rescue I was a part of a couple years ago where you know, anyone who's been in a sanctuary or farm will know that lots of times they put these bands on the hens just to mark them and identify them. And this farmer had put bands on his hens. But unlike the bands that sanctuaries use that are like these loose bands that will expand as you grow, and so like it's really, they get bigger and bigger as the hen gets larger. They didn't care and really didn't want to lose their markers on the hens and know which hen is which. So they had hens that didn't expand. They put them on when they were kids. And all the hens, like their feet had grown around the band, and they'd been, you know, like they were infected and gorged to the point that like a normal hen, you know, the foot would be like that big. These hens had feet that were the size of like tennis balls sometimes, and they could barely even walk. They're hobbling everywhere. And so and this is just like one small example of one of the horrible things that happens on pasture-raised egg farms. And the problem is, all of these animals are domesticated animals who don't necessarily have the best survival skills on their own, and they've been bred to have all sorts of health issues, which we can talk a lot about. But so the moment there's a problem, you know, they're all like infants. Like literally the process of domestication is taking otherwise wild, survivable animals and breeding out all their adult characteristics so they become like children. So dogs, for example, are infant wolves. Chickens, domesticated chickens are infant, you know, even when they're adults, they behave like infant jungle fowl from Asia. Cows, like 3,000-pound cow or steer should be fear nothing, right? But if you've had an interaction, many of you who've had interactions with these 3,000-pound steers probably have an interaction where they seem scared of you. It's because they bred out all the characteristics that are adult-like, and they're all like little children. And like little children, they don't know how to care for themselves. And so anytime something happens to them, you know, like any reasonable parent or guardian would say like, okay, you know, there's a band on the child. Maybe I should watch and make sure the band isn't, you know, blocking blood flow to the foot and causing massive infections and preventing them from walking. But a farmer who's producing these animals only for profit is not going to think about any of those things, because even one medical procedure can be quite expensive, right? Taking a hen to the vet a single time is going to cost $200. It's going to be a lot cheaper to just kill the hen, buy a new little baby hen for, you know, 50 cents or $1.
Okay,
Are they
so
susceptible to predators?
It depends on the arrangement. Certainly at a lot of farms they are. I mean, if you have proper enclosure, I mean, just like at a sanctuary, there's some sanctuaries that do better on predator protection than others. And usually dying by a predator is not the worst way you're going to die. I mean, it's still terrifying and bad, obviously, but like, you know, slowly dying from hypocalcemia, being cannibalized, you know, having like a vent prolapse that's never fixed, and you know, constantly having pain in your abdomen for months and months, or all the hens, you know, virtually all the egg-laying hens would probably die of cancer if nothing else gets them, you know, which is just something that's bred into them that can't be stopped.
awesome.
So they kill the roosters while they're babies anyways, all of them, so what's the point of cage-free, right? And secondly, how do they collect the eggs from the farm? If like the
It varies. at Petaluma, from what we can understand, they were using these like mechanisms to just scoot them all to the side, and they were actually hand plucking them. And this does happen at some cage-free farm. The more modern big Dutchman facilities have like a conveyor belt that the hens lay the eggs. The other thing that's kind of weird about cage-free and cage facilities is like, because these facilities are engineered to collect eggs, they never really like stand on stable ground. I mean, it doesn't matter that much to hens because they like perches anyways, but like everything's at a slant, and you just like walk around and you're like, why is everything slanted? And the reason is because this isn't a living environment, it's an egg production environment. So everything's engineered so like it becomes easier. So like both enriched colony cages and the aviary platforms are usually at a slant, and they'll roll down, and there's often a conveyor belt that will take them down. And the modern one is self-sorting mechanism. Again, like the more machinery you have, especially if the birds are not protected from machinery in some way, there's a distinct possibility, especially when birds are stuck so tightly that someone gets caught in the system.
Presentation and reforms that would empower activists and be in line with our message about deliberation, and also give us a victory. And yeah, you should feel free to ask questions about DXC as well. So I'll just loosely keep a stack, but I want to be more informal at the discussion. So, but you can go ahead, Suzanne.
I was just going to add one thing about open spaces that people would not know. When they're freed from the cages, like put in a sanctuary, for the first few weeks, they clump together at night and can suffocate each other, so that they have to be separated. Because it's heartbreaking because they don't understand the space and they don't know how to interact with each other. So it's like bumping into bookcases, but it's life-threatening.
So Suzanne, and then Michael, and we also have a question from online.
Yeah, similar to the egg collection question. I mean, they must clean in the cage-free facilities the feces at some point. How does that happen?
Yeah, so they usually in the aviary systems they have this multi-tiered platform, and they raise and lower. I've never seen it in operation, obviously, because when you're in facilities like you're cleaning, but there's typically there used to be two types of kind of cleaning systems, at least mechanized cleaning systems. One was like this big arm thing that just like swept everything out, and now there's a new type that's like a manure belt that like I think they're even like blow dried. The feces are blow dried and heated because apparently blow drying the feces it makes it less likely that it'll cause infection, and it just like drying things, oxidation kills bacteria. So like what disease to develop salmonella, it's better to blow dry. So they have these like manure belts, like they just like carry the feces out and they go to the end of the enclosure. But yeah, but oftentimes, I mean, it's a lot harder. It's easier to do that in a cage system than in an aviary system. In the aviary cage-free system, yeah, I've never seen it in operation. I've seen videos and pictures of it, and I've read descriptions of it in papers, but I've never seen it in operation. But they do, in theory, they're supposed to remove, I think the manure belt systems, they're supposed to remove the feces like every 3 days. So that, you have 10,000 animals. Like imagine, we had 30 dogs in here and we remove the feces every 3 days.
Yeah.
It's actually wouldn't even, it's probably more like 100 dogs to have proper comparison. If you had 100 dogs in here, we're only removing the feces every 3 days. And we didn't, it's not like we're doing full on clean. It's just
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say something about pasture raised. Almost all of the egg-laying hens that are raised in this country are not raised in a pasture raised situation. It's a very, very small, it's like probably less than 1% or something. It's very, very small. And there's not enough room on the planet to be able to create the number of eggs that people currently eat with that sort of a situation. So I mean, even if, and as Wayne talked about, it's not, it's still a bad situation. It's just maybe it's better than the caged and the cage-free situation, but it's a pie in the sky, extremely elitist, situation. So it's not anything. If anybody ever says, "Oh, I eat pasture-raised eggs," that's not that doesn't. They're not guilt-free from participating in horrendous harm.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll take the question from internet.
So May from London asks, so how does this inform our activism? Where do we aim? The people or government laws? She asked the government in general. So
I mean, I can give my opinion. I think where our movement is right now, as Prop 2 demonstrates, government law is not that helpful because we got a law passed, or I don't live here, but people got a law passed and it wasn't enforced. So if we're gonna have some sort of like law passed, we need to make sure that it's like one, actually helpful, but two, actually enforced. And I don't know if as a movement right now we have enough power to do both of those things without like abandoning everything else. It would require all of our effort to like just focus on like that enforcement of that one law. That's my opinion. There might be other laws out there that are more easily enforced or like seen to be enforced. Like for example, if there was a law banning the sale of eggs in grocery stores, like that would be pretty easy to see like this law is being broken right now. And like, but I don't know. So that's my opinion. I don't know. Eventually I would like to see, we want to see the Species Equality Act, right? But that maybe is a little bit down the road. I don't know. Other people have different opinions.
Related. Oh, Amy, you want to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, moving on to something else.
Okay, well, I'll just say on that. I mean, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not particularly optimistic about the legal route myself. I think ultimately, unless we demolish the whole system of laws, which I don't expect, we'll probably have to have laws that are passed in order to accomplish goals, at least the goals that look like dismantling animal agriculture entirely. But I think for me, I would and prefer personally and more motivated by focusing on impacting the systems and the opinions that exist out there out in the public rather than the laws. I mean, there's historical examples like Brown versus Board of Education. Everybody, oh, this is a great case, like desegregation. The first time the Supreme Court passed it, nothing changed. Something like 2% of the schools in the first few years or something actually desegregated. It was only when there was just an additional shift in the public opinion and some bartering within, I think, the Congress about funding that desegregation actually started to happen, right? So I personally prefer to focus as much as possible on the political will, and then the laws will be there to follow. Do you want to say something, Chris?
No.
Okay.
We move on.
Amy. Yeah.
Just, I think historically every social movement, every social justice movement has entailed both.
Yeah.
Change of opinion and change of laws. And,
Sure.
so I think they work in tandem. That's escaping me right now. Oh, yes. I want to go back to humane washing, which we have talked about, and that challenge of, when we embrace welfareist movements, what happens, does it make people feel comfortable, at where they are? And so that's just an issue that I certainly haven't resolved, but I don't want people to feel comfortable eating meat regardless.
Yeah.
And when we do get these kind of welfareist laws passed, clearly it does help, at least marginally help some individual animals, and obviously that's a good thing. And since we're on a Jewish theme today, there's a saying that if you save one life, you save the world. And so if we save one life, it's worth a whole lot. But that said, is there that danger of people feeling comfortable?
I don't know if there's any actual scientific studies on this, but I know anecdotally, if the topic comes up in conversation with people who aren't vegan, vegetarian, omnivores, people, oh, I only eat humane meat, or like, oh yeah, I don't eat a lot of meat, or like, I only buy cage-free eggs. So anecdotally, I think that justification is present in people's minds, and I know even my mom, like when she was, this is a while ago, when she had just become vegetarian, my brother was still living at home, but she was still cooking for him. Like she would buy like humane chicken, and I was like so mad at her. I'm like, this is like, she's like literally like it's probably not even different. Like just and so even she was a vegetarian, and she was like justifying it for like someone else. So I do think that danger is there, and it reminds me of this presentation that HANA did when they were here about like trickle up social justice. You know, as opposed, my fear is if we do all these small welfare reforms, we have to fight this battle so many times. You know, like, no, cage is no good. We have to like do colony cages. And it's like, actually, never mind. Colony cages are not good. We need to move to an aviary system. That's not good. We need pasture. Like, how many times do we have to fight this battle versus maybe it takes a little bit longer the first time, but we only fight it once. You know, we work to like the very, like the lowest common denominator or whatever. Like, people shouldn't eat eggs at all. And does that make sense? I don't know if people were there for that presentation. Was really good. But,
That's great. Yeah, and species equality is not just dismantling animal agriculture, right? It entails more than that, and so to be cognizant of that. So Priya, Milena, I saw some hands over here. It's getting close to 12:30, so I'll just take the hands. Whose hands were up before? Were there? Jahwe. Okay, and then Chris. So we'll take those. It's almost 12:30. After that, if you have to leave, we'll formally end, but we can certainly keep discussing. People are welcome to hang out and continue to page views. But after that, I'll stop the questions and do the news and events and wrap up.
So just to follow up on what Amira was saying, there's this quote that humane meat is the wobbly pin which is holding together the whole system of animal agriculture. And basically, I think there are statistics, and I'm gonna like mess them up, but they will correct me. So basically, most animals are like most of the meat that people are buying is meat from animals who are raised in factory farms. And even if humane meat is the best, like even if we're having this conversation, humane meat is honestly the best you could do. That's like 1% of the, very small percentage of the meat that, or whatever products that are humane. So basically, when people walk inside of Whole Foods, well-meaning people who care about animals walk inside of Whole Foods or Chipotle or whatever, they are like, I want to help animals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy humane meat. And I think the takeaway to answer May's question on the internet is like, what we want to change is we want people to say, I care about animals. I want to do something about this. Not I'm going to do something, I want to buy humane meat. That's not, that is not the answer. And I think we know that people want to, we know people want to help animals. And we've had conversations with people inside and outside of Whole Foods who have like supported us, even as people who eat animals, and just shocked at the consumer fraud, but also at cruelty. They feel like, I'm paying more because I care about animals. And that's the discourse or, the conversations that we need to change. And I think, open rescue is also something that we want to see grow. And I think open rescue is such a slap in the face for the whole, for, humane meat and for animal agriculture, because we're not just saying like, this is what we believe. This is like practical, what I've learned recently, practical abolition. Like we are going inside of these places, we're gonna take animals out, and we this is welfare. We're gonna redefine welfare.
So I believe it was, is it pertinent? Yeah, go ahead.
So like instead of the dichotomy of cage versus cage-free, it's I buy eggs or I support rescue. So I think that could be the dichotomy that we aim for.
Cool, really cool. Okay, so Milena and then Jahwe.
I remember where my thought came from. I think it was Dr. Amy was speaking about like what is the research on change. I'm a psychologist, and the research does suggest, at least individually, people do make incremental change. It's very rare to make a complete 180. And maybe many people here who went vegetarian first before vegan, or your parents bought humane meat before they realized that wasn't good. So, I do think to be aware of that process, that even the people who are promoting animal welfare, there's still the goal of the end outcome of, well, I think we'd all love a vegan world. And so what are the necessary steps that may have to take place to get there, and to always be pushing the envelope of, okay, let's go cage-free. Oh, that is still not good enough. That's not where we want to land. Push it again, push it again, push it again. I think that's how individuals change, institutions change, cultures do change. And I think most of us in the movement are really trying to get to that place of, yeah, freeing all the animals. And it's freaking hard.
Jolly.
Oh, my question is, because it sounds like there needs to be more research, and with the research that some of you have already done, which is great, how can you spread that to the animal rights organizations like MFA, who's been advocating for different companies to go cage-free and whatnot? How can you get them on your side?
Because I would take this because I talked to the folks at HSUS and probably most in our group. And actually, I mean, I love them. I think they're Paul Shapiro is a hero. And I've gotten in trouble for saying those sorts of things, but I think it's true. He did open rescue in the early 2000s. I will defend the integrity and the good intent and the effectiveness of anybody who's done work like what he did in the 90s and 2000s. Frankly, even the work he's doing now. I mean, they're strategic disagreements, but they should not overwhelm the vast commonalities we have. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think social movements that explode find symbols and framings that bring everybody together. And we haven't done a good job of that in the animal rights. We're very much in our own little fiefdoms. And I'm not even, I don't see our job as like educating MFA or HSUS, because I think it's just as much our job to learn from them as it is to educate them, and frankly find out if everything I'm saying about cage-free eggs is wrong, and there's a new study that's more definitive that proves all the evidence that I've looked at is not actually true, then I have to be ready to, and I should be ready for the animals to say, like, no, I was wrong about that, and it's good. This is a good change. But I think to get to the point where we can even have that sort of discourse and people can change their minds, there needs to be some form of communication between different fiefdoms within the animal rights group, and that doesn't really happen. And I think there's divides in the grassroots and divides in the big nonprofit sector, but the biggest divide is between grassroots activists and the nonprofits, where there's a lot of folks, and it's not like it's like the Great Wall, you know, the Great Wall actually is a great metaphor, because the Great Wall was terrible. Like, everyone got through it, and it's not protect China at all. So, but like metaphorically, most people think, oh, the Great Wall. It's like the Great Wall as it was intended is kind of what's happened with the animal rights movement, where I think especially nonprofits and grassroots activists don't talk to each other, don't learn from each other. So I think the first thing is communication. The second, and I definitely reach out to David, to Paul. I don't know as many folks at MFA, but I guess I do know Bruce, but he doesn't work on cage-free stuff. He works on the good food stuff. So I think we need to have communication. And the second is, you know, even like with the recent thing with SeaWorld and the big conflict between HSUS and PETA, if people had been able to like have a dialogue before the conflict erupted publicly, and if HSUS hadn't, so let me just step back. People don't understand what I'm talking about. HSUS recently announced a partnership with SeaWorld, which PETA has been campaigning against for God knows how long. And a lot of folks in the PETA camp were super upset about this. I have close friends who were in tears and so just furious about this and said, like, I can't believe HSUS is doing this. And if there had been communication and the two camps had had an opportunity to have like a strategic dialogue to think about, okay, like, we're not going to agree about everything, but let's think about maybe there's a way for us to deploy our comparative strategies to the advantage of the animals. So instead of having SeaWorld and corporate animal abusers divide us, let's play them. Let's pretend I'm the good, and maybe they're doing this, we don't know. Like, I'd love for it to be the case. I'm pretty sure it's not the case, because I know, yeah, it is hard.
No, it is often where there is
sometimes
strategy behind the scenes.
Yeah, usually it's among groups that, you know, like THL and HSUS do this a lot. It's among groups that have that very similar strategic vision. So it's more like it's tactical collaboration and not strategic collaboration. And the difference is tactical collaboration is when we all basically have the same strategy. We're going to have different pieces. We're not actually arguing with each other. Strategic collaboration means, hey, we might have actually very different strategies and visions for how the movement's going to operate, but we still need to find some common ground. So, and I think that doesn't happen at all. I think what happens is, if we disagree, we just hate each other and never talk and spend a lot. If we spend any time engaging at all, it's just trying to destroy each other instead of thinking, okay, maybe we can work this to our advantage. Like maybe there's a way for MFA's work, HSS's work to actually make ours better. And I'll give you a concrete example. I think the fact that Proposition 2 was on the books was amazingly beneficial to us because it gave us an opportunity to point out how fundamentally flawed the entire system is, right? Now, that didn't make HSUS super happy because it's like, well, Prop 2 is also our signature achievement over the past decade. But maybe there was a way for us to work together to make it happen, to make our investigation and their legislative initiative happen that would have enhanced both of our capabilities in the future. But it's hard because, like in this case, I actually talked to Paul Shapiro a lot about this beforehand, and I wanted to try and set up some sort of arrangement so when it came out. But even things like confidentiality, there isn't enough trust within the movement that I felt like I could comfortably share these things and not have them in some way undermine our work, just to be blunt. Which has nothing to do with my personal shots with Paul. It has more to do with just institutional incentives and the obligations he had. Like, just one example is HSUS wouldn't allow anybody at HSUS to sign an NDA before we gave them any information about the work we're doing. If they had, I think we would have been happy to share everything we've done, but we couldn't get that basic step. And because no one cares enough to think like, okay, and it's weird because in the corporate world, like, you know, Arun will tell you, like NDAs are very common among even competitors. Like Microsoft and Apple sign NDAs with each other because they know, hey, an NDA is a non-disclosure agreement. It's basically, hey, we want to have a conversation and don't want to use the conversation, well, don't want the information that's shared in this conversation to be used against us in some way, so let's just promise we're going to keep this in confidence. And it just doesn't happen in the animal rights system. But I think overcoming it requires creating communication channels and then starting to create a culture where we see coalitions as valuable, even when there's different strategic perspectives. So I don't know if that answered your question, John. I tried. I mean, I tried to set up even like a mailing list and a phone call, like, you know, every few months and said like, okay, let's get the people who disagree most on the same call, ideally in the same room, but it's hard.
I think one interesting thing about this presentation for me is that it seems like there have been welfare movements, laws in the past that have worked, even at a minimal level, and that I like the idea that we're not totally against welfare, you know, from an ideological perspective, but very much in what actually works, right? Not much to say the laws. I was curious in terms of your research, you come across something in the last 50 years that actually seemed to be effective, or practically effective.
I do think criminal prosecutions are effective when they happen. And the problem is, right now, usually, you've probably heard of the metaphor of the hen guard or the fox guard in the hen house. Prosecutions or any sort of rigorous enforcement only happens when the regulator or the prosecutor has sufficient independence from the regulated party. So you see the same problem with the financial industry. And Arun and I know a lot about this because we're both finance guys. Like where the Fed and the SEC, there's this revolving door between banks and the Fed. And so like a lot of the regulations don't seem very, you know, adequate because the incentives are not aligned. I mean, the regulators, usually they're trying to get a job at Goldman Sachs after they're done at the Fed. So it's like they're not going to pursue the regulations very aggressively. And things like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which Elizabeth Warren pioneered, have been really effective in finance and creating agencies that are really independent from the industry. The idea is like you're tasked with only protecting consumers. You don't have any involvement in the industry except to protect consumers from financial fraud. And right now, the DOA, both at the state and the federal level, is almost always the agency that's protecting animals. And if you look at just the mission of the Department of Agriculture, the mission of the institution is to promote agriculture in this country. Right? How can you simultaneously promote and regulate an industry? You just can't. And so I think the efforts that I like most are efforts that create some sort of independence, specific. It's more like, how can we create independence? I think it's great that whenever there's investment in an animal control department, I think that's good news. Because having people like Cindy Machado, if you know Cindy Machado in Marin County, she's an animal control officer who's in it for the animals. She's beholden to the animals. She's beholden to the cruelty statutes of the state. She doesn't have to worry about farmers. But it's tough. What's that? Yeah, I mean, I think Dina's work is great too. And Dina's does a lot of animal welfare work at the Animal Welfare Institute. It's like it's similar to HSUS but smaller, but their focus is creating certification agencies that are independent. So like one of the big scams, and this is a scam in finance too. You'll know a lot about this. In animal welfare, is most of the certifications that happen are paid for by the farmers themselves. Right? So and this happens in finance too, where like if you want to get your bond rated, like AAA, you go to Standards & Poor's and you pay Standards & Poor's to give you the rubber stamp. And naturally, like Standards & Poor's or a Global Animal Partnership or Certified Humane are not going to have a great incentive to say like, you don't get our standard because the customer's not going to come back. Like this is how I make my money. And so one of the things that I think that Dina does that's really, really cool is she's trying to create certification regulatory programs that don't have this financial linkage to the industry. So I will never sanction any animal welfare standard, but to the extent there is an animal welfare standard that actually is rigorous and the audits are good and they are kind of in it for the animals, it's animal welfare approved, which was pioneered by Dina at AWI and then spun off and is now run by a guy named Andrew Gunther. And they don't take money from industry. They are a body that gets money from donations, from animal protection groups, and then they certify only farmers who meet their very rigorous standards and are not beholden to those farmers. Now, as you might imagine, AWA only approves, it's like they have like, the total number of animals they're covering is like a few thousand, I think, right? And GAP is covering 290 million animals. And the reason for that difference is because farmers are actually scared of programs like AWA because it's not beholden to them. Well, programs like GAP and Certified Humane, what's that mean? Global Animal Partnership, that's Whole Food Certification Program. Where again, the fees are paid by the farmer themselves. It's just like, if you wanted to design a system that would cause massive amounts of fraud, like that's kind of what we've done. And I don't know why more legally minded people, I mean, maybe people like you or lawyers who have experience in other industries that have been regulated, need to start writing about the subject. Say like, hey, I've been working in finance for the past 10 years. I can tell you about all the problems in finance about having this sort of certification system. We need to revamp it and think about it in a completely different way. But animal rights advocates would tend to be newbies about these sort of things. We're not like grizzled veteran regulators who know how to fight these regulatory battles. We're happy for anything. Like we get anything, but it doesn't lead to the best outcomes because we don't have that experience.
But when these are, I think we have to keep in mind that these so-called, regulators or that what the purpose is, which is marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
In Canada, our SPCA has SPCA certified. So like actually like an SPCA is like certifying farms for like selling animals' bodies. But that it's just like so twisted. But
Be a good thing to write out.
I think you were vulnerable to just write something.
Well, he could write ethical perspective. Okay, so that was an awesome discussion, and people should feel free to continue talking among yourselves, each other, the panelists. So first, I want to thank Almira and Priya and Wayne for their presentation. And also thank you to them for the work they've done going inside of these facilities and documenting the conditions, taking these animals out, saving their lives, and telling their stories. It's incredibly important, and thanks to the whole community, all of you who supports them in doing that. So I'm going to mention a few things.
Can I actually I wanted to point out that the three of us are a very small part of the Open Rescue Network.
Very true.
It's a group effort, and people like Michael Leslie have done relentless research. I mean, a lot of the things I reported, I'm just a mouthpiece for the work they've done. So, like, honestly, they're the ones to thank. And I also want to point out there are a lot of folks who have also been part of the investigatory teams documenting the footage. And, like, the research is great, and it's good to have that in place, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. And just showing people even one image of what a cage-free facility looks like means so much more than all the evidence in the world. And, there are a dozen people. Jackie was in the egg farm at JSMS. Samara was. Jason was. Sapphire. And so there are a lot of people here participating in that. And all of you participated in the campaign, which is even more important. Because frankly, you can have the best photo in the world. It doesn't get out there and no one sees it. Who cares? And the campaigns are what allow those photos to get out there. So everybody in the room is a part of this project. And frankly, we should be applauding ourselves together, not me, Almira, and Priya. Because we're just spokespeople for the work you've done.
Well said. And so there's many different ways actually to get involved in help, and those are listed on the board. I don't know if pollination is listed up there, but you can definitely Social media is like spreading the message online and effectively with as many people as possible. Ross is doing an awesome job with that. So I'm going to mention a few upcoming events. We have an Animal Lovers Mixer and Vegan Pizza Night. Those are the same thing.
That's going to be tomorrow night at 7 p.m. There is an Earthlings movie screening in San Francisco on Tuesday the 5th, April 5th at 5 p.m. And then Sanctuary Friday, they're usually on Sundays, but this month we're going on Friday to the San Francisco SPCA. We're going to be hanging out with some cats. That's on April 29th, 9:30 a.m. For that one, you want to talk to Chris. So just want to point out a couple of things. Yeah. So if you would like to sign up for our mailing list, you can talk to Wilson, Priya, Chris, Amy, Lamira,
Anybody with a
Sapphire,
smartphone.
Jenny Lee, anybody with a smartphone. DirectActionEverywhere.com/sign up.
Actually, can I stop you?
Yeah.
Who here is not on the mailing list? Because I will come to you and make sure you are. Are you on the mailing list? Are you not on the mailing list? Okay. This is a great way to feel connected to everything that's going on. And there's a lot of things going on.
That is absolutely true. Okay, great. So we got this awesome giant whiteboard from Alex, who's a community member. And we've got all the April events coming up, and you got announcements there on the right. Get involved. All the different ways to get involved in DXC. There's a wide variety of projects. One sec, JC.
And we're still adding events. We're putting them up, so.
Yeah, we just did this last night.
So we're still adding events, but you can get an idea here. Of course, through the mailing list is another way to keep track. Through our Facebook page, Direct Action Everywhere SFA area. If you have any questions about any of these groups, you can come ask anybody, and we'll direct you to the right person. And then one other thing that's super important and awesome is registering for the DXC forum. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes.
Go for it.
So the DXC Forum is like a week-long sort of like conference type thing that happens. It's the third time this will be happening this year. The last week of May. It's okay if you can't come for the whole week because I know people's lives are busy, but it is like probably the best thing you will do all year.
Yes.
It actually is.
So you should, you'll get this T-shirt. So if you can register at dxcforum.com, it's really fun because it's like this like fun checkbox thing that you can do, and I love like those forms.
Yeah, and if you're interested in coming and you're not sure which days you can make it, still it was very helpful to us to know how many people intend to come.
Yeah.
So go ahead and register, and then you can.
The price will be going up on April 15th for the registration fee. If you can't pay the registration fee, that's okay. Just let us know. And if you have any questions about the forum at all, you can ask Wilson or myself, and we will tell you because it's Jane Wells, Michelle's going to be there. This will be like full day of open rescue training. If you're interested, everything's going to be.
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Jason?
Oh, I was just an announcement. I was going to announce some things that are happening with outreach.
Cool. Yeah, we'll take announcements for other events. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and the forum is annual, right? It's like
Yes.
the third annual.
It is. This is the third one.
Why don't you make that?
So my name's Jason, and I do a lot of volunteering with outreach, and some stuff at Open Rescue. And with outreach, we are putting up posters around the Bay Area, and that is a very effective way to help get the word out and just help inform people about this community. And we've been putting up some in Berkeley, and we've got posters for the forum. So what we're going to be doing is basically, if folks want to go on a bike ride, or if they're going out to eat at a vegan restaurant, you could take one of those and just ask them if they have a space to put up posters, and that's a great way to just do something, some activism. That is, obviously non-confrontational. It's pretty risk-free. So I know a lot of us like to go out to all the vegan restaurants around the area, and so that's a great way to help out with outreach. And then another event we have coming up is we've got a leafleting at Very Vegan Sundays, which is once a month vegan social event in San Francisco, and so we pass out flyers about animal liberation and information about our meetups, about DXC, so folks can get connected because as some of you a lot of you may know, DXC is an international grassroots network, so it's really about building this community, which prevents people falling back into eating products and a place where they feel supported, where they don't feel like the weirdo at work who eats salads. and you get to support and some potlucks. So yeah, that'll be happening. I believe that's going to be happening April 10th, Sunday, April 10th. So if you are interested in some low risk activism, vegan leafleting, that's actually one of the first things that I got into as an activist. And it's really easy. You get to meet new friends, and then you can take a break and go hang out at Very Vegan Sundays and get some awesome vegan food. So
cool. All right, thank you. Any other announcements of the events?
For Rosemary. So many of you in the room know our friend Rosemary Alice, who's going to South Africa on Monday, and she's still pretty frazzled trying to get her house finished. And the cleaners were supposed to come today, and as of this morning, she hadn't heard from them. So she's afraid the cleaner person won't show up. So she asked me to announce here if anyone can go and help. She's in Mountain View, so it's like 30 minutes from here. So obviously you contact her first to see. Somebody else suggested maybe just have the cleaners come after she leaves, but we don't really know. So, and she's pretty frazzled. So if anyone can reach out to her and go. And Mark and I can't go today. We're going to go tomorrow before the pizza thing. But she, just things we don't do. So, but she specifically said, "I'm going to get some DX because they always come through for me." So.
No pressure.
She needs someone just to open the door, or
what?
What does she need?
She needs to help clean.
Oh,
yeah, and it's not that much, but yeah, if the cleaner person doesn't come, so it's like windows, not that much, but if some.
Arun.
Very quick announcement. A couple of us are working on creating a physical community of people living in Berkeley, that's apartments and households. We're trying to create like an activist, vegan, DHC-oriented group of people who literally live within biking distance. So what that initially means is getting together people who are willing to move and live in apartments together. It's a long-term project. We're going to be working on it for years, but we're trying to get it kicked off at some point in the next few months. So if either you're interested at some point in moving and living in a household with a bunch of vegan activists, or people who may, reach out to Katie and me, and we will get you organized for next.
Woo! Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, along with that, we're working to secure actually like a animal rights community center and a place where we can have these meetups in Berkeley. And it'll be much bigger than this because, as you can see, we are kind of at capacity as it is. So we're super excited about these ideas of having a community space and also having activists living close together, really supporting and empowering each other. Yeah. Any other announcements? Cool. If anybody wants to run a football with Kings and me after this, you can do that. And Gene, Mark, and I made plans to go get beers later. So whoever wants to come along to those, welcome to come and hang out. You don't have to drink. I don't know. We'll sort it out.
No, just because we have a bunch of stuff to do. So I'm surprised.
Well, whatever.
Yeah,
but
no.
if people want to hang out with Mark while he's in town. And otherwise, just, yeah, hang out.
Rosemary.
You too, right?